The biggest driver of neurodegenerative conditions are a dysfunctional gut. And there's lots and lots of studies that support the pathology to really illustrate how a dysfunctional gut can become one of the most toxic things to your brain. In fact, I've done a lot of lectures on that recently because one of the things that we want people to understand is that the gut and the brain are intimately connected, right? There's a number of ways in which they're connected through the vagus nerve, the enteric nervous system, through the circulation, through the lymphatic system. All of those things connect the gut and the brain intimately. Now, the gut supports the brain quite profoundly in many different aspects, but a dysfunctional gut also can become the most toxic thing to the brain. And that's the part that we don't talk about enough. So it's a spectrum, right? On one end, the gut is the most beneficial thing that supports the brain, that heals the brain, that on a daily basis provides functionality to the brain. On the other end, a dysfunctional gut is actually the most toxic thing to the brain. So let's talk about that end, how the gut becomes the most toxic thing to the brain. When you have intestinal permeability, if your gut is dysfunctional, that means your intestinal lining is dysfunctional and your intestinal lining becomes permeable. Part of the problem with that is you start leaking into your circulatory system all kinds of toxins and foodborne particles and bacterial and viral particles that shouldn't be leaking in at that level. One of the most egregious of those compounds is something called lipopolysaccharide, or LPS for short. That is a bacterial-made toxin that's made by about 50% of the bacteria that exists in your gut. Now, when the bacteria make it, it's on the luminal side of the intestinal lining, which is the side of the tube, the open tube that connects your mouth to your bottom. And when it's made in the luminal side and it stays in the luminal side, it's fine because it gets grabbed by defecation, by stool moving through, and it gets taken out of the body. If your gut is leaky, the problem that occurs is it doesn't stay in the luminal side, it leaks through the lining and enters into circulation. That causes a condition called endotoxemia, which means that you have a high level of toxin within your circulation. Right? And this toxin is a very, very egregious toxin because it is very pervasive. It can make it into all kinds of regions of the body. It's a tiny, small molecule. It's a lipid molecule, meaning it has a fatty acid, so it has a great affinity for our own tissue, and it can wedge itself into our various types of cells. And when it wedges itself into cells, it elicits a massive immune response. One of the areas in which it loves to go is the brain. And so it goes through the circulation, enters into the brain, and starts wedging itself into different parts of the brain. When it gets there and it does that, the brain's immune system, microglial cells, start getting activated, and they go, there's a toxin infecting the brain. So it activates the innate immune system that comes here and uses inflammation as a way of disrupting what may be causing an infection in the brain. That inflammation damages brain tissue. So over time, as this damaging is occurring every single day, and especially if your gut is dysbiotic, your gut is responsible for repairing the brain at night by releasing something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So when your gut is dysfunctional, not only is your gut leaky, and you're leaking in these toxins that are damaging the brain, but that same dysbiotic gut is also not producing BDNF. So you can't repair the brain effectively. So you end up with a net damage to the brain over time. And that net damage has been shown since 2017 in a number of publications to be the #1 driver of things like Alzheimer's. The same pathology occurs in Parkinson's disease. In Parkinson's disease, it starts in the enteric nervous system, which is a neurological system that covers the digestive tract, right? But it moves up and then eventually moves into the central nervous system and the brain, and that damage eventually provides Parkinson's-like symptomology. So the two most scary neurodegenerative conditions, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, are very clearly driven by a dysfunctional gut and by leaky gut that results from that, and by the endotoxemia, the leaking in of that toxin that is as a result of leaky gut.